friends, and welcome to this camp dedicated to all the sidelines after D4 knight f6. So the first lecture will be about the very popular London system. But before I start, please let me know if there are some problems with the camera, with the sound, so that we wouldn't discuss technical issues later. You cannot see me. Everyone else can see me? Is there any difference now? Just let me start again. Yeah, and now I believe you can see me. Okay, so if everyone can see me now, we can start. There are no more technical problems. So today we will start with the so-called London system, which arises after d4, knight f6, and here white can play either the immediate bishop f4, or first he can start with knight f3 and then bishop f4. When it comes to the system that I will be suggesting, it doesn't make any difference. For example, regardless of the move order, our next move will be e6. Now, let me just tell you that in this camp, I will suggest variations that are very much in line with my previous camps on Nimzo Indian defense and Queen's Indian defense. So I want to meet all these sidelines in a way that is suitable for Nimzo Indian and Queen's Indian players. And also the second important characteristic of the variations that I'm going to suggest is that they are mostly based on understanding, and you don't need to know so much of a theory in order to play them. Today you will see what a practical system I'm going to recommend against the London variation. So there are a lot of model games that I want to show. The material is a bit too much, and if time doesn't allow us to cover everything, this is not a problem, because we can prolong the lecture for a while. Also, we have on Sunday we have the Q&A session, and during the Q&A session I can cover something that was not discussed before. So this is not an issue. Let's first of all discuss the general ideas behind the system that I'm going to suggest. So knight f3, e6, and bishop f4. Let's assume that this is the starting position of the London system, and here my move is c5, immediately attacking the center. Now obviously white's most popular choice is e3, because if black takes on d4, he wants to take with the e pawn, and in this way he avoids the symmetrical structure that might arise after c3. But obviously, we will also discuss the move c3, which is, in my opinion, a bit harmless. So after e3, we immediately take on d4 and play b6. This is the starting position of today's lecture. I think that this setup is very suitable for everyone who is playing the Queen's Indian defense. Here I want to mention something very important. In this system, one of the main advantages of this system is that white cannot play in his typical London fashion. For example, you know that in London, black mostly plays d5, white occupies the e5 square, then white can organize an attack against the king. There is no such ideas in this variation, and I think that by selecting this system, you will put your opponent out of his comfort zone. So why we play b6? Here, this is a very important idea to understand. We don't want to play bishop b7. Mostly, of course, there are some exceptions, but mostly we will be trying to exchange the white squared bishops via the a6 square. But when white plays c4, when he chooses a setup based on c4, then obviously the bishop will be developed to b7. So let's see how the game might continue. A very typical London move is c3. White can also play knight b to d2. He can play bishop d3, but the move order here doesn't matter so much. What can black do now? Obviously, we can exchange the white squared bishops even immediately with bishop a6, as we're going to see in a while. This is the favorite approach of the Serbian grandmaster Injic. In my opinion, however, a bit more scientific approach to the position is to wait with the move bishop a6 until the moment when your opponent makes a move with his bishop. For example, bishop d3, bishop e2, and then bishop a6. But if you don't want to dive into such subtleties, you can play bishop a6 even immediately, and this will not change the nature of the game. Let's assume that we follow the scientific strategy, bishop e7, he plays knight d2, very typical London moves. Once again, I wait with the move bishop a6, and finally, white is running out of useful moves, and he plays bishop d3. Note that I can further wait. I can also play d6, and only after that bishop a6 if my opponent didn't play bishop d3 until this moment. So bishop d3, bishop a6. Usually there is an exchange and short castle. Actually, this is the structure that we will mostly discuss today, and this is the structure that you will get in almost 95% of your games, I think. And here I want to suggest two typical moves that you want to play. Usually you put your pawn on d6. Not immediately on d5, because actually a very important detail about this system is that the d5 square will be reserved for the knight. Usually I want to bring the a6 knight to d5, and the knight is very, very strong on d5. But you will say that the knight is not stable on this square, because at any possible moment, white can kick it back by means of c4. That's why, in order to secure the position of the knight, we have another thematic move, and this move is b5. That's why this is the typical construction: d6, knight c7, knight d5, and then b5. How the game can continue? Let's suppose I play knight c7. My opponent plays rook e1. The move order here is not that important. d6, and after queen e2, our thematic move is already b5. A very typical idea. Later on, I want to put the knight on d5, and the b5 pawn will prevent white from playing c4. Also, by playing b5, I'm getting ready to go for a minority attack when possible, because when the pawn is on b5, the threat of b4 will be always in the air. Let's take a look at how the game might continue. For example, h3, knight d5, bishop h2. Now I should protect the pawn, and then we start playing on the queen side. For example, this rook usually goes to c8. We play a5. A very nice square for the queen is c6. And we look for a possible opportunity to play b4. Usually, we play b4 when white cannot answer this move with c4. Let's make some moves in order to feel a bit the position. Rook d1, queen c6. You can see that there is no obvious plan for white. If you look at this position from white's perspective, it's not so clear what exactly he should do. We have no weaknesses on the king side. The e5 square is not available for white's minor pieces. The bishop and the f3 knight are restricted. And on the queen side, actually black is the side who is better. So queen c6, and okay, it's not so easy for white to find a decent move. Let's say if he goes for such idea, you can exchange it, and you can already play rook c8 and b4 on the next move. And in this way, you will obviously create a queenside weakness. a3, a5, b4 is coming. This is the general setup that I will recommend. Obviously, the things are not so simple, because we will see some cases in which a white plays c4. We will see some cases in which white plays bishop b5 and a4. But first of all, we will take a look at a couple of model games showing black's perfect setup, our typical queenside strategy. And I want to start with some games by Alexander Ingic, who is a very, very big specialist in this variation. And the other big name that you should follow in this variation is Peter Leko. So the first game, we will see only a fragment of it, is the game Michał Serin against Alexander Ingic. Okay, I flip the board. So d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop f4, c5. e3, you see, it's impossible to go wrong because our move order is very easy. Knight d2. So here I want from you two suggestions. What is the scientific way of playing the position, and what is the lazy way of playing the position? Yeah, exactly, James. The lazy way of playing the position is just to play bishop a6, which is, by the way, the favorite of Alexander Ingic. And I find it very, very practical. If you want to be very precise, just like Peter Leko, you can play bishop e7. Okay, d6 sneak is also possible, but then you should recon with bishop b5 checks. That's why if you want to wait with the move bishop a6, I would recommend to start with bishop e7, then short castle, then d6, and finally bishop a6. But d6 usually should be played after castling. Okay, Ingic is not interested in move orders. He immediately goes for the exchange. Bishop takes a6, knight takes a6, c3. You see, knight c7. I can also start with bishop e7. This is not a very big issue. Rook e1, only normal moves. h3, d6. And here, what is our positional idea? We want to play knight c to d5 and then b5. That's why in this game, Michał Serin played a4, which is a typical move in this variation. But note that by playing a4, white cannot stop our plan from happening, because black has plenty of resources to prepare b5. And you see, queen d7. I want to proceed with a6, b5, and then knight d5. Queen e2. Now, obviously, the move is a6, very simple. Knight e4. Usually, white goes for this exchange in order to try to activate some pieces, and he wants to exchange the defender of the queen side. But usually, exchanges are favorable for black because we keep playing on the queen side, and by every exchange, white decreases his attacking potential. Now, black just follows his idea, b5, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, he takes, a takes b5. And now, if I tell you what will be black's next three moves, what would you say? How black can develop his play if it was only black to play? Very well, James. Let me see one more correct answer. So far, only correct decisions. So here I see correct decisions, but note that we don't prepare e5. So the rook e8 and e5 is not our usual plan in this position, because e5 is the most controlled square by whites. We want always to put our knight on d5, the queen on c6, the f8 rook goes to c8, and then we prepare b4. This is the way in which we are going to attack white's queenside structure. This is a kind of minority attack. Note that another very useful move that I'm playing in these setups is h6 also, because in this way you prevent some pieces from coming to g5, and you avoid any problems related to the back rank. That's why, by the way, Michał Serin immediately exchanged the bishops because in this way he manages to activate his knight, so he can play knight e4, probably transfer the queen to g3. Obviously, all these threats are not real, and these threats cannot cause any problems, but white should play somehow. So h6, this is useful in any case. Now knight d5, and white plays queen f3, going for queen g3. And the d6 pawn is the only possible target, actually. Now queen c7, usually the queen belongs to the c file. We have explained this idea because b4 is the threat, and when playing b4 we want to be sure that our opponent cannot answer with c4. And after queen g3, the d6 pawn is under pressure, but now I want to show a typical operation in this system. You can exchange the rooks and play b4. Actually, if we exchange the d6 pawn for the c3 one, then we will get a position with an isolated pawn, which is practically very difficult for white. For example, if white goes for queen takes d6, knight takes d6, we take on c3. And practically speaking, white still needs to be precise in order to make a draw here, even though the position is objectively a draw. So he played c takes b4 and immediately queen c2. You see how well the queen is positioned on the c file. Now the knight is attacked. Also, black can start collecting all these pawns, and at the end of the day, they got this position. Queen d6. Here, Ingic played for a small advantage with queen takes b4. The game eventually ended in a draw, but Ingic was pressing all the time. But here, even more ambitious would have been to take this pawn because the b pawn is very weak. And then rook c8, the activity of black's pieces provides him with some advantage. I think that so far everything is clear because in this system, black's plan is crystal clear. Now let's take a look at another game of Alexander Ingic. This time his opponent is the Russian female grandmaster, Polina Shuvalova. So let's take a look. d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop f4. By the way, if white plays bishop g5, this is the Torre system that will be discussed tomorrow. All the variations that I'm going to show are very consistent. So bishop f4, c5, e3, we take and play b6. Knight d2. Knowing Alexander Ingic, what do you think is his move here? Yes, definitely. He is not interested in move orders. He doesn't play bishop e7, immediately bishop a6. Bishop takes a6, knight takes a6, queen e2. Usually white plays this move, but then we play knight c7. Actually, we already know that the knight is very well placed here on c7. Short castle, bishop e7, h3. You see, everything is very, very similar. And here I want to know black's candidate moves. And what, in your opinion, what is the most precise continuation for black in this position? Okay, already I have seen some ideas. Let's think for 15 more seconds. just to know some of your ideas. Very well, very well. I see that you get a perfect understanding of the structure. Okay, so the most precise move in this position is b5, very strong positional decision. The idea is to secure the d5 square for the knights. If they tell us play again, we will put the knight on d5. Then the queen goes to d7. Then this rook goes to c8, and the queen goes to c6. But there is something else that is very important. What if white decides to play without c3? Then we should play b4 under favorable circumstances, because in this way we fix the c2 pawn, and the c2 pawn becomes the perfect target for our attack. And actually this is what happened in this game. So Polina Shuvalyova played knight e4 because it's very difficult to come up with a plan. Later on, I will show the only constructive idea that white has in this structure. But for the time being, we will restrict ourselves to white's natural play, because this natural play is what you will get in the vast majority of the cases. So here we have different possibilities. In my opinion, the simplest is this one, as played in by Ingic, then knight d5, bishop h2, and can you tell me in 10 seconds the best move for black? James, there is something even more precise. Your move is good enough, but there is something even more precise. Okay, now you corrected your mistake. Great. So far, I get only correct answers. Obviously, b4, fixing the c2 pawn. And now white's position is strategically very difficult, because now we can put pressure on the queen side basically for free. The c2 pawn is a target. Sorry, the c2 pawn is a target. The a2 pawn is a target. You see, queen d3 was played, rook c8, rook e2, and here many possibilities. In the game, he played queen a5, which is pretty natural. Usually, in such positions, I prefer to triple the heavy pieces on the c file. For example, a move that I would have preferred is rook c6, followed by queen c7 and rook c8, with a terrible pressure along the c file. If white tries to eliminate our pawn, obviously we play a5, and then comes another pawn on b4. Rook a1, queen c7, and what is the problem? I want to say something very important in this position. When you triple your heavy pieces on the c file, you will put tremendous pressure on the c2 pawn. And at the end of the day, white will be forced to protect it with a knight. But then the d4 pawn becomes a weakness. And how we get to this pawn? Very easy. Rook c4 and bishop f6. If needed, even queen b6. Therefore, dear friends, I would say that this position is strategically lost for whites. Pay attention to this bishop. The bishop is doing nothing. White doesn't have any constructive ideas. And this type of position you will get very, very often against the London system, especially when facing less experienced opponents. In the game, he played queen a5. Let us briefly consider what happened in the game. Rook a1, rook c6, a3, rook c8, knight e1. Now, what is the right approach to the position? Put pressure on the d4 pawn. And in my opinion, the correct approach would have been rook c4, then bishop f6, and soon, very soon, white is going to resign. So I think that this is a very instructive game, showing black's typical ideas. There is no point in proceeding with the rest of the game, because after this moment, there are some inaccuracies. At the end of the day, Injic won the game, but the remaining part of the game is not that instructive. That's why we will focus on another game. See which one exactly. Yeah, so this time we have a minority attack executed by Injic. His opponent is the Iranian Grandmaster Tabata Bey. So let me flip the board. D4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop f4. We know this move order very well. b6, c3, bishop e7, h3. So you see that in this position, Injic decided to play a bit more scientific, in a more scientific way. He played bishop e7. White waits with the development of the bishop. He didn't play bishop d3. But finally, Injic decides to play for this typical move, bishop a6. Another possibility would have been short castle. If white keeps waiting, we can play d6. And after bishop d3, we play bishop a6. Bishop takes a6, knight takes a6. Queen e2, for example, knight c7. Let's suppose he goes for a castle, and here the most obvious move is b5. Then we want to play queen d7, knight d5, rook fc8, queen c6, and slowly but surely organize the advance b4. This is the alternative solution. But okay, he played bishop a6, knight a6, short castle, rook e1, knight c7, knight d2. Now there are two or even three acceptable moves. For sure, there is nothing wrong with d6. It's possible to play knight d5 and then b5, but he started with b5. When you know the ideas, you don't need to remember anything. So queen e2, knight c2, d5, bishop h2. Here, since he didn't play d6, now queen d7 is not possible. But okay, he has queen b6. This is not a tragedy that we didn't play queen d7, because after d6, finally the queen will land on its perfect c6 square. And you see that white once again goes for knight e4. Usually, you will see this move against opponents who are not very well familiar with this variation. Later on, we will see that white's most challenging plan consists of a4 trying to open the a file. And I will show you how to deal with exactly this setup. But let's take a look at what might happen if white plays standard moves now. Knight e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, d6, queen d3, a5. We keep playing on the queen side. Knight d2. The knight is actually heading for the e4 square, but you can see that white doesn't have any constructive ideas. There are no threats in this position. So rook c8, knight e4. Can you tell me two moves that you consider generally useful in this pawn structure? I'm asking this question in order to develop your intuition. By naming the different possibilities, you will get a better feeling of the structure, and you will know how to play even in a blitz game. Let's develop your reflex about this structure. Okay, I see that very often some of you suggest the move b4. Is b4 a good idea now? When we play b4, we play b4 when white cannot play c4. So one of the ideas is queen c6. This is a move that I can play almost automatically. Another possible move that I always consider in such positions is h6, and actually this is what happened in the game. So rook e2, and here obviously queen c6 would have been a possibility because now b4 is already a threat. But Injic did something else that I want to discuss, this knight f6 idea. Actually, this is a very typical exchange strategy. in this structure. Usually, exchanging all the knights doesn't solve White's problems, because White is remaining with his bishop on h2 that doesn't do anything. So you see, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now I want to go for a minority attack with d5 and b4. This is the point behind exchanging the knights. Now White doesn't have the white knight doesn't have the e5 square. If we play d5 with knights on the board, White will try to establish a knight on e5. Now this is not the case, but you will say, okay, he will establish his bishop on e5. Yes, but then we gladly exchange the bishops, and all the heavy pieces endgames that might arise in this pawn structure are favorable for black. And this endgame that we are going to see just in a second is a very typical example. You see, rook d1. It goes without saying that the structure arising after d5, e5 is just very bad for White, because we are better on the king side thanks to the e5 pawn, and also we are better on the queen side as well. So rook d1, now this is very typical. b4 is the threat, and he exchanges the bishops. Bishop takes e5, rook e5. In your games, you can very often get this type of endgame with heavy pieces, queens and rooks, and be sure that this endgame is almost always very, very favorable for black, and black is fighting for an advantage. The only thing that you need to consider is the idea f4, f5. If it's working, White can create counterplay. But you see that now we're very fast with our queenside play. b4, rook e3, b takes c3, b takes c3, queen b2, immediately invading the queenside. This is the classical minority attack that we can see in all the manuals about positional chess. Rook d2, you see that all black's pieces manage to invade White's position. And let us briefly see the final of this game, queen g1. We invaded White's camp via the queen side, but finally we win the battle on the king sides. What can be more classical? And okay, here after queen e7, he didn't wait for the move of his opponent and he resigned, but it's not difficult to see the mates. This would have been the continuation had the game continued. Another example of endgame with heavy pieces is this game of Kirill Shevchenko, who is playing with black. Let us briefly take a brief look at this game. c5, e3, c takes d4, e takes d4, b6, c3. Now you see a bit more scientific approach to the variation. He plays bishop e7, Kirill Shevchenko. Knight d2, now he plays short castle. h3, he plays d6. We have plenty of useful moves. And when his opponent finally moved the bishop, then bishop a6. Bishop a6, knight a6. Queen e2 in the game. Black played queen c8, which is perfectly obvious and normal move. But what is the obvious alternative to queen c8? What we would have played if we were in black's shoes? Exactly, yeah, exactly. Only correct answers. Obviously, queen c8 is not called for in this position, and we can play knight c7. But this move, queen c7, doesn't change the character of the game. Even if you don't stick to the exact move of them, you will never get in trouble in this system. So knight c7. And once again, you see knight e4. This is what you will get in most of your games. I guarantee after the camp you can start playing online blitz games, and this is what you will get. I have hundreds of online games in such positions. Knight takes e4, queen e4, knight d5. Okay, his opponent played bishop g5. Bishop g5, knight g5, knight f6. Okay, protecting from the mate threat. Queen c6 now, and after rook e1, what is the thematic move? This is a move that is very important in this pawn structure, and I want many good answers. Very well, very well. So the thematic move in this structure is b5. Very important part of the plan. And here, white plays knight e4. Should I exchange the knights, or should I play knight d5? What do you think? What is the typical exchange strategy? Exchanging knights is a good idea in this position, because we know that endgames with heavy pieces are favorable for black. That being said, knight d5 is also a possibility. For example, yeah, knight d5 is possible. White can play queen g3, but we have enough resources to protect the d6 pawn. Then usually this move h6 will be possible, and we try to organize b4. Okay, he played knight takes e4. We know that this structure is good. Rook e3, a5, a3, and okay, finally we can play b4. But Shevchenko played another idea. He wants a rook endgame, but a rook endgame that arises on his own terms. So if white exchanges what happened in the game, then the b2 pawn is the weakness. In my opinion, another possibility would have been b4, take, and this endgame is also slightly better for black, because this pawn is not going anywhere, and we can combine our pressure on d4 and b2. So a3, queen c4 was played in the game. Queen takes c4, b takes c4, and this is a typical structural transformation that you can have in this variation. Usually, in order to win the game, this b2 pawn is not enough. You need to create a kingside weakness as well. For example, let us take a look at the game. h5, king f2, now rook h8. What he wants? Actually, he wants to fix white's pawn structure with h4. Then, if possible, he will bring the king all the way to f5, and then it's possible to combine the threats on the b2 pawn and the kingside play. For example, if white plays passive moves, let's suppose that he just waits. Now, here you see that white is already in trouble, because the d2 rook is tied to the defense of this pawn, but I have also threats on the king side. This idea, rook h6, rook g6, rook g3, for example. That's why the opponent of Shevchenko correctly decided to play g3, just to be able to answer h4 with g4. But then rook g8. Now the threat is g5. And what is the idea? If I manage to remove this pawn, for example, f takes g5, rook g5, then I can also build a strong center by means of the advance e5. King f3, g5, rook e2, rook b8. There is no need to rush, and finally he took. You see, combining our queenside pressure with kingside play is the right strategy. For example, after g takes f4, in any possible moment he should recon with this idea h4 and rook g3, but in this specific case probably rook g1 and rook b1 would have been a better idea. Also, the h3 pawn can be attacked. He took with the king, and after such such an idea, e5 could have given black decisive advantage. Because there is this tactical subtlety. If he takes, I take, and after rook d5, e4 is winning the game. After king takes e4, rook e8, and I'm basically winning a rook. So I think that this is enough when it comes to minority attack, typical queenside play. If we have more time at the end of the session, we can take a look at some other model games. They will be included in the PGM file anyway. But now I want to proceed with another typical idea. First of all, let me know if everything is clear until now. Do you have questions? Just to be sure that we're on the same page. Okay, I see that everything is clear now, and I want to show one game, actually two games by Peter Leku that I like very much. And this time, White is playing in a more ambitious way. We will see how to handle White's play on the A file and the queenside tension. This is a very major conflict in this pawn structure. That's why here you should pay a lot of attention. But we are going to see that black is not risking anything. Let's start with the game Abdusattorov against Peter Leku. So d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop f4, c5, e3. We take on d4, play b6, c3. From a perfectionist like Leku, you cannot expect bishop a6. He will definitely go for the scientific move order. Bishop e7, bishop d3, and now bishop a6. But I remind you, you can play bishop a6 if you want. There is nothing wrong with this approach. Bishop a6, knight a6. Everything is clear, and here Abdusattorov played a4, d6, knight d2, knight c7, h3. So what is the most logical idea for black? What we should do? Just playing knight d5, okay, but bishop h2. How we should support our knight? Obviously, by preparing b5. So just a second, there is a very interesting question. We will come to this question a bit later. What about c4 without bishop a6, instead of bishop a6? Usually, when white goes for a c4 setup, you prepare d5. For example, castle, knight c3, and immediately d5. What kind of structure can arise here? For a very typical structure would be the isolated pawn, for example, in this version. Obviously, this is a very terrible version for white of the isolated pawn, because white doesn't have any attack. Black can easily put pressure on the pawn, and just basic knowledge about the positions with an isolated pawn is enough to handle the position. We will get back to this question a bit later also. If white plays b3, usually we sooner or later, better after preparation, like knight c6, rook c8, we can go for hanging pawns, and hanging pawns will be quite vulnerable in this position, because white is not well settled for this type of structure. Thank you very much, Kari. This was a very nice question. So bishop takes a6, knight takes a6, short castle a4, everything clear so far, and here we play a6. You see that Leku starts preparing b5, queen e2, b5, and so far we have seen that white was playing without a4. Usually rook d1, knight e4, just playing on general grounds. This is what most of your opponents will do. But here you see this idea, rook a2, which is a bit more challenging. White wants to double his rooks along the a file, and then possibly open it and try to penetrate. But you see that we are perfectly ready for this strategy, because after rook a1, we will put our queen on c6 and everything is under control. Then we have plenty of possibilities to wait. How we can wait in this position? Obviously, knight d5 can be played. Obviously, h6 is a useful move. And now I will show another very interesting idea. Just keep in mind that if we manage to exchange all the rooks, for example, if we manage to provoke 8 takes b5 and then exchange all the rooks, we are better. And this game will show why we are better in this structure and how we can provoke this idea, 8 takes b5. For example, one of the typical ways is to bring, let's say, knight d5, knight b6, and then 8 takes b5 will happen. Sometimes you start with knight d5 and you play knight d7 and knight b6. White in this position played knight e1. He keeps applying his queenside strategy. Knight d3 is the idea. d3 is a very nice square for the knight. Then the knight can go to b4. h6, I very much like this move. I always like to have this g5 square under control. Knight d3, knight d5 was played by Leku. Obviously, the knight on d5 is very strong. We control the b4 square, bishop g3, rook f to d8, and queen d1. White tries to keep the tension, but at the same time, you see that it's not easy to find some constructive ideas for him. Possibly, you can imagine White playing rook a3, rook a2, queen a1, but this is a science fiction. And Leku, another idea is obviously queen b3. Yeah, this should have been said, because the queen is putting pressure on b5, and after multiple exchanges, we can eventually lose the pawn. But you see what Leku did. Knight d7. Knight d7 in this position. What is the idea? Knight b6, and I want to provoke 8 takes b5. Queen b3. Now knight b6. Actually, Leku will be fighting for the a file. In later examples, I will show that even if I play something like this move, something like rook a b8, and I completely give the a file away, I don't have any problem whatsoever. Yeah, tell, knight b6, knight c4 is often an idea in such structures. So, rook a b8 is also a possibility, but just pay attention at how black plays. Knight b6, now there is a pressure on a4. Obviously, a5 is very bad because of knight c4. So he exchanges everything. We exchange all the rooks. Queen a3, knight c7. Can White benefit from the a file? No, because the only available square is the a7 square, but this square doesn't bring any benefit to White. But after exchanging all the rooks, Black can be sure that his opponent doesn't have any counterplay, and our typical strategy is to expand on the king side, f5, g5, f4, and it turns out that White's play is already very difficult. Let's take a look at this game, how it continued. Queen a7 was played by Abdusattorov. f5, knight f4, king f7, take. Now what White can play? Queen a3 he played. f4. Now the bishop is out of play forever. And Leku calculated the following variation. Finally, he broke on the queen side. This thematic idea. C takes b4, queen c1, bishop f6. You see that Black is already winning. So the b pawn is not going anywhere. I will take everything. Now with this move, he protects the e6 pawn and threatens bishop d4. This is how the game ended. Out of desperation, he sacrificed a piece, and here white resigned. Very thematic game without any problem. And I like all the ideas that Leco applied in this position. Very impressive idea was this one, knight d7, knight b6. Let me just for a while show how Ingic deals with the tension on the A file, because sometimes if it's impossible to use the approach of Peter Leco, you can use the approach of Alexander Ingic. And now we will be discussing his game against the Lequang Liem. So d4, knight f6, everything clear now, b6, knight d2. Okay, this is not a $1 million question to guess the move of Ingic in this position. I think that all of you know what he plays. He's not waiting with some bishop e7 ideas. Immediately bishop a6, knight a6, c3, bishop e7, everything is clear. So short castle, h3. Here b5 was played, knight e5. This is a bit artificial. For example, now white pretends that he has prevented d6 because of knight c6, but white doesn't have resources to prevent d6 forever. Sooner or later, I will cover the c6 square, just like in the game, a6, then the knight will come here, the queen will come to b6, and finally I will be ready to play d6. That's why this is not some problem for us. Short castle, knight d5, bishop h2, queen b6. You see that the move order is not important, but it's very important to have a general understanding of the position and to know which pieces goes where. This is what you should know. A4. You see that Liem is aware of the ideas in this system. I think that he also has some course about the London system for Chessable, and that's why he knows how to handle this structure. d6, knight d3, and here black starts playing his typical moves. Rook f to c8. Then what are other typical moves? The queen can go to c6. I can play h6. By the way, very often we put the bishop on f8 because sometimes when there is this opposition and we play b4, white can try to play c4 and d5. Not very often, but sometimes have it in mind that the bishop on f8 is very safe. Knight d2. Here exactly bishop f8 was played, queen rook a2, queen b7, not queen c6. I'm not sure why. I would prefer queen c6, but here I want to illustrate something else. Okay, how Leco would have approached this position? Probably in this way: rook's queen c6, rook a1, and now this typical maneuver works. Then knight b6 is coming. But what Ingic did, he is not interested in fighting for the a file. He just gives it away to his opponent, but it turns out that white cannot use the a file very efficiently. Okay, he can play, for example, rook a7. I play queen c6. I can always exchange one pair of rooks. After exchanging one pair of rooks, I can also exchange another pair of rooks. So here he played knight f4, always take, and here knight d5 is possible. He played queen d5. This doesn't change the structure. The advantage of this move is that we put pressure on the d4 pawn, and very often b4 is a possible idea because white cannot follow with c4. Queen a5, rook a5, sorry, h6, only typical moves. Rook a6, queen d7, and you see that finally black arranged all his pieces in the way he wants. And okay, white's rooks stand beautifully on the a file, but there is no objective advantage. Bishop d2, queen c7, rook a7. What is our threat after queen c7? Who will tell me just in a second? Yes, of course, immediately b4, because with my last move, I'm covering the c4 square, and white cannot play c4. Another idea is what was demonstrated in the game. I want queen c4 because due to the weakness of the b2 pawn, white cannot exchange. So he played in this way. I will not follow this game until the end. Finally, Ingic won the game. But let me just tell you that now b4 would have provided black with an advantage. For example, knight c1, b takes c3, b takes c3. Here, taking on c3 immediately is not so good because of queen f3, but moves like rook b2 or bishop e7 are good enough because this c3 pawn is very, very weak. Okay, I hope that this example is clear enough. And now I want to discuss the construction bishop b5 and a4. This is something that white often does in this variation. Let me see whether it's here. I want to show actually one game between Grishchuk and Peter Leko. Okay, so here d4, let me flip the board. C takes d4, e takes d4, b6. Yeah, and here, okay, Grishchuk played the move bishop b5. This is a very standard idea that you can see when playing against high-level players. Bishop b5, and what is the idea of this move? The idea is to answer bishop a6 with a4. This is white's goal. And I think that the bishop b5 is a very precise move order. Not everyone will play in this way against you. He should be very well prepared in this variation to play bishop b5. But as we will see, black has more than one good way to fight against this setup. So Leko played bishop e7, h3, and here, when the bishop is on b5, actually you can afford yourself to develop the bishop on b7. For example, after short castle, we can play bishop b7 because after bishop a6, white can play a4. And if we go for such an exchange, we should calculate very well whether a6 works or not. I can after that I can show some example in this structure as well, but you should be aware that if a6 doesn't work immediately, you can be in trouble. But how Leko arranges his pieces? He plays bishop b7, rook e1, b6, just normal moves, but the bishop is on b7. And what is his idea? Since white has committed to bishop b5, then this maneuver, knight a6, knight c7, will come with a tempo. So all the typical maneuvers that he makes are the same, but all in this case, when white plays bishop b5, he only puts his bishop on b7. It's very easy to remember. So a4, Knight a6 was played by Leku. Grishuk plays knight a3, and you will see why exactly he selects this development of the knight. So here we are talking about high-class experts. It's very unlikely that you will see exactly this play in your games, because when playing hundreds of online games, I have never seen this construction. So just a second. If queen e2 instead of rook e1, preventing knight a6. So, but in this case, probably I can play a6 and b5 because I have this possibility. Okay, this is an important clarification. Knight a6, knight a3, knight c7, bishop f1, and here we play a6. What black wants to do in this position, as always, we want to organize the advance b5, queen d7, bishop c6, and then we play b5. After b5, we establish a knight on d5, and in this case, having our white squared bishop on the board is even good because this bishop is exercising tremendous pressure on the diagonal. But okay, white's idea of keeping the white squared bishops is that actually he wants to play c4. So rook c1, and then after move like rook c8, he plays c4. And this is the idea. But now pay attention at something else. Since we provoked the move a4, white wanted to stop b5. Now we can use our c7 knight in another way. What do you think was the idea of Leku? What he played in this position? a5, and he brings the knight to b4. By the way, here why Grishuk played rook c1 and not c4 in c4 immediately, because if he plays c4 immediately, then after d5 we will get a favorable version of the isolated pawn, because these pawns will be exchanged. That's why he starts with rook c1, and now after c4 I cannot play d5. Why? Because of c5. This is a very high level play. But here it turns out that we can reroute our knight via a6 to b4. So queen b3, knight a6, knight b5, knight b4, and at the end of the day, they started repeating the position. If white doesn't repeat, we are more than ready to follow with d5 and get a favorable version of an isolated pawn. So let's repeat the most important points. Here. We go exactly for the same setup. But the bishop is on b7. Since his bishop is on b5, we want to execute a6 and b5 and get a favorable pawn structure. That's why we provoke a4. And once you see the move a4 on the board, you put your knight on c7. This is very important. And the point is that now, if white doesn't prevent it, we will play b5, finally. And if white goes for c4 at some point, since the move a4 was played, we have the idea of a5 followed by transferring the knight to b4. Exactly in this case, d5 is also possible because the c5 square is under control. Did you get the main idea in this setup? This is very important for me, and please let me know if I should clarify something. Okay, I see that so far everything is clear. Please let me know if there is something unclear about this setup. I repeat, this is something very specific that you will not see many times in your games when white plays bishop b5. Yeah, so here bishop e7, you make all the moves like usual, short castle, but only not bishop a6 because of a4. You start with bishop b7, rook e1, d6, and here you want a6 and b5. White will prevent it with a4, and once you see the move a4, you bring your knight to c7. Very, very simple, not so difficult. If you know this thematic idea, it will be crystal clear. Here, another possible way of meeting bishop b5 and a4 construction is demonstrated in another game of Peter Leko. Let's take a look. This is the game Esipenko against Leko. You will see how Leko managed to transform into the same structure that we know. So this is the game, bishop f4, c5, e3, takes, b4, and here not bishop b5 was played, but a4. Bishop e7. Now I don't play the immediate bishop a6. Why I don't play the immediate bishop a6? What he will play? If I play it immediately? Yes, obviously, the idea of a4 was to play bishop b5. That's why I prefer to first develop the pieces. Bishop e7, c3, now castle, h3, d6. So Leko is not in a hurry to develop his white square bishop. Knight d2, but you see that white is going behind in development. When the white king is still in the center, and you completed your development, and you castled, you can already play bishop a6. Bishop b7 is also some option, but bishop a6 can be played already because of one specific operation that you should remember. Here, the White's idea was to answer bishop a6 with bishop b5. That's why he was playing all these waiting moves. But now, please remember the following operation and always calculate it in your games. Knight d5 comes with a tempo, bishop h2, you exchange it. When this exchange is good, I have already provided you with the principle when you can easily carry out the advance a6. So knight c7, I attack the pawn and play a6. And you see that now I want to take the pawn. After the exchange, short castle, we get something we're familiar with. And what is the thematic move in this pawn structure? We know this structure very well. Of course. The thematic move now is b5, and we know how to put our pieces. And let's see how Leko played against Esipenko. So he took knight a6, rook a1. Am I afraid of giving the a file to my opponent in this pawn structure? Not at all, because now I know that I will put my queen on c6 and nothing will happen. Knight e1, queen c6. Knight d3, this knight goes to d5, the other knight will go to c7. Everything is familiar and very simple to play. Bishop g3, Leko is going for all his typical moves. Knight c7, queen d1, h6, queen a5, rook a5, sorry. What is the typical move? Which pieces I wanted to exchange in this pawn structure so that I can start playing on the king side. This was applied in one other game of Peter Leko. Yes, we need to exchange all the rooks. In this way, white doesn't have any counterplay. And here, rook a8 was played, obviously. Peter Leko knows very well this pawn structure. Rook takes a8, queen takes a8, queen c1. Now the queen returns to the base. Queen c6, queen a1, Now he didn't play the immediate f5. He played first king f8, some waiting move. But since white doesn't have any constructive ideas, we can afford waiting in this way. Knight c1, and here you see f5, knight e2, king f7. We start our kingside play that was seen in the first game of Leko that I have shown. This was the game Abdusatov against Peter Leko. And here you have the same story. Here, usually, white doesn't have constructive ideas. While we want to play g5, f4, his position is difficult. Let's see what happened. b3, he's preparing c4 as some kind of a counterplay, but bishop g5 immediately attacking the d2 knights. Knight f3, bishop e7, repeating once, knight e1, and here the simple g5 followed by f4, then knight e8, knight g7, knight f5 would have provided black with an advantage. In the game, black played knight b6 just to put the other knight on d5 and take the c4 square under control. He even exchanged, he wanted to exchange queens. Probably Leko was okay with the draw in this specific case, even though he is slightly better. But here he executed the advance e5 and got a better position. So in my opinion, the simplest way to the advantage would have been in this position to play g5, and then f4, knight e8, knight g7, knight f5. Black is obviously better. So this is how you should handle the idea with a4 and bishop b5. This is a very typical construction, and you should know how to handle it. Now, let me briefly show something because it happens very often. d4, knight f6, another game by Peter Leko. This time his opponent is Igarza Vasquez. So Leko is playing with black. Once again, we get the same move of them. And here, white plays c4. So white plays c4. Now there is a question. I play g6 as my second move. Then how can I play bishop f4 system? Okay. My recommendation against London is e6 because, as I have pointed out, it will be very much in line with with Nimzo Indian and Queen's Indian setups. Yeah, we can discuss all these questions in the Q&A session. G6 is also possible, but in my opinion, you can consider this system against London players because obviously when white plays London, King's Indian and Queen's Indian players will play different setups, and when announcing the camp, I have pointed out that this will be very. I want to connect this camp with my previous camps on Nimzo Indian defense and Queen's Indian defense, and this is how I play against London. I just want to share my opening repertoire here. So c4. Sometimes you can see this move, but this is not very typical for London players because when somebody plays the London system, he usually prefers to put the pawn on c3 without the need to study so much theory. This is not the move. c4 doesn't fit into the mentality of the London player. Nevertheless, you should be ready for this move, and you should know only one simple thing when white plays c4. Always develop the bishop on b7 you play bishop e7, bishop b7, short castle, and d5, and you have okay, because you can get queens Indian, isolated queen's pawn or hanging pawns, but in both structures, this is a better version for black. That's why Leku plays bishop e7, knight c3, short castle, and regardless of what white does, bishop b7 and d5. This is the way to fight against the c4 setups. Bishop e2, bishop b7, short castle, and finally d5. Then we are ready to proceed with d takes c4 on the next move. Rook c1 was played. What about b3 to play a position with hanging pawns? Black is more than ready to play a position with hanging pawns. Why is bishop a6 not that good in this pawn structure? Let me see. Actually, it's also possible. It's also possible to play bishop a6 and d5. But usually here I play bishop b7 in a more classical way, and d5. Probably it's a matter of taste. I don't know if queen a6 is not a bit annoying. Probably queen a6 is queen a4 is a bit annoying here because bishop b8 is a threat. But if queen a4 is not dangerous for some reason, you can consider bishop a6, but just make sure that you want to prepare d5. So bishop b7, short castle, d5, and white played rook c1, going for a position with an isolated queen's pawn. Okay, he can play b3, for example, and inviting us to go for hanging pawns. Even if I take immediately on c4, this is okay, not immediately knight c6, d5, but this is a good version because the bishop on f4 is misplaced in this structure. Usually white has bishop here on b2 and the other bishop is on d3. That's why this version of hanging pawns is almost always good for black. In my opinion, before playing d takes c4, you can make a very nice preparatory moves, and these moves are very typical. That's why you should know them. You can play knight c6, then rook e8, bishop f8, g6. You go bishop g7, and when everything is ready, you take on c4 and start putting tremendous pressure on the hanging pawns. In the game, white played rook c1, d takes c4, bishop c4, with a bishop on f4 and not on g5. This version of the isolated pawn is perfectly acceptable for black. White doesn't have any advantage whatsoever. Now, in order to prevent knight b4, knight d5 idea, he played a3, but Leku insists on exchanging pieces. And also the knight can go to d5 via the e7 square. White played bishop g5, h6, bishop f6, queen f6, and already black is the one who can fight for an advantage if white is not precise enough. Just note that if he plays bishop h4, there is this typical idea for isolated queen's pawn. Many ideas are possible, probably even knight e7 in this position, because if he exchanges, then I have very strong attacking potential on the g file. But even if knight e7 is not possible, then bishop e7 followed by knight h5. Black can provoke further exchanges, and in this way, the isolated queen's pawn will be getting weaker. After bishop f6, queen f6, the immediate d5 is not dangerous because of knight e5, this or knight a5 probably. The bishop is hanging. But okay, he equalized in this way, knight e4, he took and played d5, and very soon they agreed for a draw. So finally, I want to show what to do against this setup with c3. e6, bishop f4, c5, c3. This is not so popular move. but I decided to include it because recently many people started playing in this way against me. And when preparing for this camp, I managed to find a very easy and universal solution. In my opinion, the simplest choice here is to take on d4 and play knight c6. One of our typical ideas here in this setup is to play queen b6 and put immediate pressure on these two pawns, d4 and d2. And another idea is to answer e3 with knight h5. For example, if white plays something like h3 and then he wants to play e3, this is already too much, because we can start putting pressure on the queen side, and you see that there is no comfortable way of defending the b2 pawn. So h3 is not a very good option. Remember another rule of thumb: whenever he plays knight c3, then immediately bishop b4 is very strong. Bishop b4, and we want to spoil the pawn structure of our opponent. Let's say that white doesn't care about pawn structure and plays something like a3. You take on c3 and you start putting pressure with queen a5. Then regardless of his move, it can be queen c2, it can be bishop d2, you can play knight e4. These queenside pawns are just too vulnerable. For example, I can show such an example: bishop d2, knight e4, e3. Obviously, in this structure, we want to exchange the white squared bishops because his white squares will be very weak and our bishop is a bit passive. That's why b6 is a nice idea. Bishop d3, we take, bishop a6, and after all the exchanges, you see that for example, such a pawn structure is better for black. This c3 pawn is a backward pawn. Also, the a3 pawn is a target. There is nothing to remember here. Just pay attention to this bishop b4 move and the idea to spoil his pawn structure with bishop c3. In order to prevent this scenario from happening, he can probably play something like rook c1. But then queen a5. And once again, I have the threat of queen takes a2, also bishop takes c3. You cannot take with the rook because of knight d5. If bishop d2, we can take and just grab the pawn. White's compensation is not sufficient. In the PGM version of the file, you will see some analysis here, but white cannot pretend on an advantage after knight c3, bishop b4. And he can also protect the knight with the queen, but then short castle, and immediately we take. Obviously, taking with the queen runs into knight d5 without any problems for black. B takes c3, d6, and once again we start preparing e5. The c3 pawn is a backward pawn, and it will be a weakness. When preparing this lecture, I was very surprised to see that after e3, the most natural move, knight h5, going for the bishop, is actually a novelty. Nobody has played this move. And in my opinion, this is the easiest solution for black. Also, this is the top choice of the computer. And after bishop g3, let's say, knight takes g3, black can play pretty much anything. If you want to play some dry position, you can play d5, and this structure is completely harmless. Symmetrical structure, you have bishop pair. But in my opinion, if you want to fight I will show this move, bishop g5. If you want to fight for an advantage and to play for a win, I suggest that you would keep the pawn structure flexible, because when the pawn structure is flexible, the value of the bishop pair is increasing. That's why I would play g6, then bishop g7, short castle, d6, and when possible, I will break with e5. This advance is never a problem. Knight b4, knight c3, bishop g7. You see that the bishop is tremendously strong. I can already play knight takes d5 if allowed, or increase the pressure with b6 and bishop b7. You will find some notes in the PGM file regarding this position, but it's clear that it's white who should be careful here. And now, getting back to your question, after knight h5, what happens to after bishop g5? Once again, we win this important tempo, and then we can start fighting for the bishop pair with h6, g5, take the bishop, bishop g7, and once again, black is doing great in this position with bishop pair. So these were the most important things that you should know when facing the London system. And I can assure you that even today, after completing the lecture, you can start playing this line with black. You don't need even to wait for the PGM file to be released, because there is nothing specific to remember. You don't need to remember concrete moves, concrete move orders, and so on and so forth. Everything is positional based on understanding, and you play with safe king. And also you see that all these positions will take the London out of his comfort zone, because he cannot build his typical London play. Now, please let me know if you understood the material very well, and if you have some questions. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad that you liked this lecture. Thank you. So tomorrow we continue with two other important subjects, the Trompowsky and Tore. And then the most important part of the camp will be pretty much done. Thank you so much for attending today, and don't forget to register separately for the second day of the camp. See you tomorrow. Have a good evening.